Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Savvy Ladies Wednesday Wisdom webinar. My name is Maggie Montemuro, and I'm the Marketing Coordinator at Savvy Ladies. If you have a question during this presentation, please type it into the chat box. And if you're joining us by phone, you can email your question to info@savvyladies.org. Today's presenter is Dr. Samantha Brody, founder of Evergreen Natural Health Center in Portland and curator at glutenfreeportland.org. Dr. Samantha has a full-time private medical practice and also works virtually with clients across the globe. She is a highly regarded speaker and has been a featured expert in the Wall Street Journal, Huffington Post, Shape, and other publications. Thanks so much for being here with us today, Dr. Samantha, and the floor is all yours.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I want to first tell you a little bit about myself and my background that I come to this presentation from. So I am a naturopathic physician and licensed acupuncturist practicing in Portland, Oregon. And in Oregon, naturopathic physicians actually have a full scope of primary care practice with the exception of major surgery and a few specific medications that we can't prescribe. So we have a full pharmaceutical formulary except for atypical antipsychotics and chemotherapy drugs. So what that does is it puts me in a position of being able to approach healthcare from both a Western medical perspective and an alternative care perspective. So naturopaths who are licensed, who are practicing in states that do have full scope of practice are actually true integrative physicians. So we're able to take a more holistic approach, being able to identify for each person which part of their healthcare is reasonably addressed from different perspectives. Let's see, there we go. I'm going to give a quick disclaimer here that my webinars are for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and are not intended as medical advice. You should seek the advice of your own personal physician or healthcare provider before taking any action related to any information presented in this webinar, including the undertaking of any diet, exercise, or other health plan or program. Thank you for bearing with me on that. All right, so I'm going to dive in here and talk a little bit about stress. And I've been practicing for 19 years, and one of the things that I've learned over time is that most conditions that people come to see me for have some kind of stress component. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that stress causes disease, although in some cases it does. But what we do understand is that the more stress that we have and the more different kinds of stress we have, the more impact it's going to have on different areas in our lives. And because Savvy Ladies is obviously a financial empowerment organization, I'm going to focus a bit on finances today, but everything I talk about is applicable to many different, or I should say all the different kinds of stresses in your life. So the first question I'll ask you to think about is, how do finances impact your life? We know on a logistical level that finances impact our lives profoundly, right? What you're going to do on a day-to-day basis, what you have around you, what your job is, or what your work looks like, and how you make choices in your life. What we sometimes don't think about is how our finances impact our stress. Now, there are many of us who are driven, many of us for whom stress actually drives our finances and finances drive our stress. I was chatting in a group yesterday that I am in on Facebook, one of the actually gluten-free groups I'm in, and I actually asked the question. I said, this is off topic, but how do finances impact your stress? And I had someone write that she said, I don't make a lot of money. I put my son through college, now paying off parental loans, car aging, no write-offs on taxes, no savings, and that's why I have a Xanax prescription. And what that got me thinking about was literally how our finances impact our stress. But there's a bigger picture also that I think about, which is that when your finances impact your stress impacts your life. Or when your stress impacts your finances, then that impacts your life. So what we have is this cycle of things that we are and are not dealing with on a day-to-day basis, the way our finances impact us on a day-to-day basis. And some of those things are in our control, and some of those things are out of our control. And so I'm going to talk about that idea today. What is in our control and what is out of our control, and what things that we're going to choose to change in order to back into lowering our overall stress load. All right, so here's how it goes. Stress is supposed to work in a very simple way in our bodies. You have to think about what it would be like before we were driving cars, and before we had full-time jobs, and before we were, living in high-rise apartment buildings. Stress is supposed to work in very short bursts. So here's what happens. You're at the watering hole with your baby, getting a drink of water, and you catch a cheetah out of the corner of your eye, and you realize that cheetah is after you and your baby. So what happens is that your body goes through a very particular process in response to that stress. Now, what you have to understand is stress is extremely important for our functioning. If we did not have a stress response, we would not be alive. The problem becomes when that stress response starts impacting us on a day-to-day basis over and over and over again, instead of in these short bursts. So let me explain. The way stress is supposed to work is that we will be triggered with this particular stress, and our body will produce a hormone called adrenaline from these little glands called adrenal glands that sit on top of our kidneys. And adrenaline is the hormone that makes your heart start to race, that makes the blood start to pump, the fight or flight chemical in your body. And so first that comes up, and then the next hormone that's released is cortisol. And cortisol is another stress hormone. Many of us have heard of that because online we hear a lot of talk about how cortisol causes you to gain weight. That's a whole other issue and may or may not actually be the case. But our bodies produce cortisol, and cortisol's function is to suppress, among other things, to suppress functions in our body that are not considered to be important in the face of fight or flight. So for instance, your immune system, your body will take the energy that it would be normally putting toward immune function and shunt it away from that, because the most important thing for you to do is to deal with the stress in front of you. All right, the next thing our body does is it dumps sugar into our bloodstream. And the reason for that is that our muscles in our brain are highly fueled by sugar. So what happens is we store sugar in our liver, and we then dump it under stress into our bloodstream in order to help us get through this process of dealing with the stress. The next thing that's going to happen is that our bodies will come to light, this fight or flight, in order to allow us to get away from whatever that stress is, to run. So we make adrenaline, our heart rate increases, our blood shunts to our lungs and our heart. We produce cortisol to suppress other functions that aren't as important, and we dump sugar in our bloodstream to fuel our muscles in our brain so we can run. That's smart, right? Our bodies are very, very wise. The problem becomes when we start doing that over and over and over again, when it's not particularly helpful for us. For instance, when your boss is yammering at you, or when you're caught in traffic. Our bodies are built to handle these short bursts of stress and then rebuild all of the nutrients that we need to make all of those processes happen, and rest and recover. If we don't have an opportunity to rest and recover from stress, our bodies will actually not be able to repair and reset. There are things we can do to mitigate the impact of stress. And these are the things that you'll see all the time on YouTube and on Facebook, and the 10 best ways to get rid of your stress, or the 10 top ways that meditation can help you with your immune system. The problem is that there are things we can do to mitigate our stress, but when we continually have stress increasing, we will continue to not be able to get out from under it, which is where the problems start to happen. So yes, we need to manage our stress better. Things with meditation, resting, breathing, supporting our adrenals, which are the little glands that make our stress hormone, because when we stress them over and over and over, they can end up getting tired and a little bit worn out. Our health is directly impacted by all of that stress hormone. I mentioned earlier that many physician visits are related to stress. The statistic is up to 90%. Stress affects us both physically and emotionally. What I'm going to do today is talk about expanding our understanding of stress, because we really need to understand what things we do and don't have control over in order to be able to lower our overall stress load. Let me explain. This is what I call stress 2.0, or the bucket theory. So the idea is that each of us are each individual is born with a different capacity to handle stress, which is why, you'll have two friends that go through something really similar and one person seems to bounce right back and the other person is a complete train wreck. Part of this is because of our history, but part of this also is just because some of us have a different ability to manage stress better. So I represent that. I think about that as a different size bucket. So this bucket is basically what I call the stress bucket, and different things go into that bucket. Now, often we think about stress as just those things I was talking about before, where we get this fight or flight thing that happens, these big stresses like a divorce or a bankruptcy or death in the family. But really, stress is a lot more than that, which is, in one way, may seem daunting to have all of these different things that you would consider as stresses. But in the end, if we're able to identify things that we do have some control over and it lowers our overall stress load, we're better able to make choices and handle that stress. Okay, so the idea is there are all of these different things that go into your stress bucket, and you can see little words on those drops going into the bucket. I'm going to go into those each individually in a moment. What happens is that the different stresses go into the bucket, and then one of two things happens. You can overflow your bucket, or a specific thing in the bucket can actually put pressure and bust a hole, and you end up with symptoms. So the idea is that it's not just these kind of big stresses that we have that we identify as stress, but the cumulative smaller stresses that build up and fill up the bucket and cause it to overflow. There are three categories of things that go into that bucket, and this is the big take home here, so I'm going to have you really focus in on this. Things you can change, things you can't change, and things you choose not to change. So as we go through this list of things that can go into the bucket, I really want you to think about which category different stresses go into. And often there are things that we feel like we cannot change, but the truth is that we're actually choosing not to change it. And taking responsibility for that allows us to take control of basically our overall stress load, right? So if I'm saying I could quit my job, or I cannot quit my job, the third thing in there is that you're choosing not to quit your job. And the difference between I can't change my job and I'm choosing not to change my job, and the way that impacts us mentally and psychologically, is a significant difference. It's a tiny little word, and it's a big difference in how our bodies will respond to that. So saying right now I'm choosing not to change my job, what else can I do even though my job is causing me a lot of stress? All right, we're going to talk about the different things that fill up your bucket, or that can theoretically fill up your bucket. Now, the most important thing to understand here is that everyone has different things in their bucket, and to one person something might be a stress and another person it might not. So for instance, I'll give an example of a certain kind of food. So for some people, coffee will actually cause their bodies more stress. So if someone has anxiety or heartburn or high blood pressure, coffee may be something that's actually causing that person stress. Now, for another person who doesn't have any of those health conditions, coffee actually decreases your risk of heart disease. It seems to have great antioxidant qualities. It helps you focus better. And so for one person, coffee might be a stress, and for another person, it may not. For one person, an issue with a sibling might cause you an immense amount of stress. Another person, it just rolls off them. So it's important to understand that just because I'm listing something that goes in this bucket doesn't mean that's something that is in your bucket. Everything is individual. There is no one answer for everyone. That's the other really important thing here. And it applies to finances as well as to every area of your life, which is that what works for someone else isn't necessarily the thing that's going to work for you. what's right for someone else isn't necessarily the thing that's right for you. And with health in particular, I see this coming up because everyone wants an answer. Everyone's looking to, what do I do for this? What do I do for that? But in the end, everything is incredibly individual. And that's kind of the foundation of what I do in my brick and mortar practice, as well as my online consulting practice working with clients, is what for you is specifically the thing that's going to make the biggest difference. All right, let's go through this list. So what's in your bucket? So remember, there are things here you can change, things you can't change, and things you're choosing not to change. So the first thing we'll look at is genetics. So imagine that we're kind of filling this bucket up from the bottom. Everyone is born with a different genetic disposition to different diseases, to different responses to different stresses. Theoretically, there's nothing you can do about your genetics, although there is an emerging field called epigenetics, where we look at whether or not a gene is likely to manifest itself negatively. And that's kind of a simplistic way to put that. But we do have some control based on how much stress our bodies are under as to whether a genetic disposition will manifest itself. But that's something that is hard to consciously, or impossible to consciously, have control over. The next thing that goes in this bucket is your past. So anything that's happened to you, you can't change, right? But I will say that there are cases where you can change how you're responding currently to things from your past. So that means basically dealing with the things that caused you distress in the past, making sure you've really looked at that and how it's impacting you. I also will, an interesting thing with your past, I'll just bring up here. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she was saying how her husband, it's really hard on her because her husband doesn't want to travel. He really just kind of wants to be a homebody. And talking about that with him, what ended up coming up was that his subconscious belief was that when you are an adult and you have a family, you settle down, you don't travel, you're not adventurous. And that is an idea that he got from his family growing up. So that stress for her of not traveling, because it makes her feel really contracted because traveling is something that's important to her, that stress is actually then attached to her husband's experience of his history and his past. So this gets a little bit complicated in looking at how far you can back things up and what you can impact. But for him, he also loves to travel, but somehow felt like he shouldn't because of his belief system, which comes from his family history. So again, those things can change, although obviously you can't change what's already happened. Nutrition is a huge component of the stress we put our bodies under. Our bodies are meant to eat food the way it came out of the earth, and that's not to say that we should never ever eat processed food, because I'm far from extreme with that in my excuse me, in my point of view. But what we feed our bodies is incredibly important as far as it impacts us on a day-to-day basis. So that nutrition category carries importance in the macronutrients. So are you getting a good balance of protein, fat, and carb for you? Are you getting your micronutrient needs met? In other words, are you getting enough selenium or calcium or the micronutrients? Are you eating enough food? Are you eating too much food? Is the timing good of what you're eating, or when you're eating, I should say? Are you eating things that your body's sensitive to? So for instance, when I eat dairy, I get really congested and I break out. So that's obviously something my body doesn't like. Do I choose to not eat it at all? Do I choose to eat it sometimes? Again, that's based on how the overall stress load for me at any time. Your environment, huge piece of what goes in your bucket, right? So environment has many, many layers to it. So that can be what you are exposed to in the actual air on a day-to-day basis, pollution. It can be the people around you. It can be the amount of noise around you. It can be the colors around you. It can be the clutter on your desk, right? So again, for everyone, what's around us impacts us differently. And then there's a place where nutrition and environment actually overlap. And where nutrition and environment overlap is when you're eating foods that have chemicals or pesticides, when you're microwaving food in plastic and eating that food which may have chemicals in it that disrupts your the way your body normally would work. Now I'm going to keep going through this list. I don't want you guys to feel overwhelmed by this at all, because it's a lot of things that can be in your bucket. What I want you to remember here is there are many things in each of these areas that you do have some control over. And if you are able to specifically pick a few things in each area, your overall load in that bucket goes down, right? So what you're doing is leaving more room to deal with other stresses as they occur. So you may not have control over a big stress like losing your job or having a family member get sick. But if your overall stress load is lower, you will have more resources to deal with that. We have so many times where we feel overwhelmed, and that alone can cause us not to be able to deal with our stress. So being proactive and dealing with each of the things that you do have some control over can make a big difference. So a small thing in one of these areas can lower the overall stress load substantially for you. Insufficiencies. This is one of my favorite, one of the categories that I think is easiest for us to deal with. So insufficiencies for me here means not getting enough of something in particular. So that can be sleep, it can be sunlight, it can be fresh air, exercise, water, physical touch, spiritual nourishment, whatever that means for you. So really looking that, that tends to be a pretty easy thing to do, to add something in rather than to take something out. So really addressing what areas you can use more support. Physical health, when we're feeling unwell, when we have physical concerns that we're not dealing with, that can cause stress. So that might be chronic headaches, it might be that pain in your knee, it might be anything physically that is impacting you. Mental health, sometimes it seems easier not to deal with something than to deal with it because of the amount of work it's going to take to dig in. So I'll give you an example. I have a client, one of my clients who's in Washington State, and she has had a really rough year. She had some big family issues. She was laid off from a job that she really closely identified with, as kind of who, her individual identification as a person was a lot tied up with this job. She got married, it goes on. And she had a great therapist that she was working with, and that therapist moved. And we talked about her finding someone new, and the thought for her of trying to find a new counselor after working with someone for so long, and that she's particularly picky, made it so she didn't want to deal with it. So we're now 6 months later and just had a long talk in our appointment this week about her prioritizing getting help and finding a new counselor, even though it's daunting and overwhelming to think about doing that. So again, addressing our mental health issues, whether they're big or small, is an important piece. When I'm anxious, it's very hard for me to do what I need to do to take care of myself, for instance. Tolerations. This is when we put up with things for an extended period of time that would cause us less stress overall if we dealt with it up front. So it can be the small thing, like the squeaky drawer that every time you open it, you go, oh, I got to get the WD-40 for that. Or it could be the big thing that you're not wanting to deal with, like the relationship with with a friend, or talking to your boss about the guy in the cubicle next to you who's been harassing you. Whatever those things are that we put up with, it really would overall cause less stress if we addressed it. I will point out here specifically, finances is something that falls into that category often. It's hard to look at and deal with our financial issues. It's overwhelming, and often we don't know where to turn and don't know what to do, which is why it's great to have education and support with organizations such as Savvy Ladies. Dealing with these things overall, our tolerations can have a profound impact on, again, the overall load in our bucket. External locus of control. This is a long, fancy term for not taking responsibility for ourselves. So when we feel like things are happening to us, it's much harder to actively make choices to take care of ourselves. And that's, that will tie in with a lot of these other areas that we've been talking about. So when you feel like you are, tired because someone, I'm trying to think of a better example than that. So if you feel like you have your mood is bad because your husband yelled at you. One thing that I say to my kid all the time is, he'll say, "You made me angry." And I say, I hear that you're angry, and I'm sorry that I said something that upset you. And you make yourself angry in response to what I do. So you have control over how you're feeling. Let's talk about that. I want you to be able to feel your feelings, and you are responsible for your own responses here. And he is able to hear that and take responsibility for his own part that he's playing, which allows him to be able to have a discussion with me about it. Family stress, I don't need to go into that, do I? Financial stress, we've talked about that. And then values rifts. This is a category that I'm working with a lot currently with my patients and clients to help people identify what their values and goals are and where they want to be in their lives, and then look at the choices they're making and looking at whether those things line up. For me, it's very important to support my clients and patients to identify where their values sit and what it is they want to have happen in their lives, to make sure the choices they're making are lined up. When those things don't line up, it causes their subconscious a lot of distress. All right. And actually, there's at the end of the webinar today, I'm going to give you a link for a page on my website when there's actually an exercise there that a friend of mine does in a class that she runs. And it's about identifying what your big picture values are, so you're more able to make choices that are lined up with that. All right, so I'm back to finances for a minute because I'm going to use that as an example of looking at this bucket principle. So when we look at all those different areas, I'm going to look at not only how those things may impact your finances, but how your finances impact that. So genetics, right? Obviously, there's no connection there. Your past, perhaps your financial choices and your financial experience has impacted things that happen, but there's nothing you can do about it from there. Finances can profoundly impact nutrition. In our culture, we spend a smaller percentage of our income on food than in any other developed country. We disproportionately spend money in other areas. So that's a discussion I have with my patients often around budgeting and eating healthy food. It's also quite often there are opportunities to look at where we're spending money that will allow us to shift things. So you're spending the same amount of money on food, but you're actually buying more nutritious foods and focusing on healthier choices, which we talked about a minute ago. Your nutrition then kind of around from the other side, coming around to impacting your overall state of health. So for instance, protein will stabilize your blood sugar. And if your blood sugar is stable, you'll have fewer mood swings. If you have fewer mood swings, you're able to address things in a more even manner. If you're able to address things in a more even manner, you have more success in dealing with any particular situation, whether that's a work situation or a personal situation. Your environment, obviously there are countless ways your finances impact you in that manner. Insufficiencies, again, so you can go through each of these. Physical health, do you have health insurance? Are you proactively making sure to do your annual exams, and are you getting your vaccinations if that's something that you do? Mental health, same. Tolerations, things that you put up with. I left that here again just because of how easy it is for people, and women in particular, to not really deal with their finances in a proactive manner. That's again not a pertinent one. Family, there are often family dynamics, wage earner dynamics, and what you're providing for your family. That person that I read earlier, how she paid off she put her son through college, and now she's on Xanax because she doesn't have enough money to take care of herself on a day-to-day basis. Values rifts, again, a big piece here in particular. Often we spend money in the same way that we learn to spend money. And does that line up with what our own values are? For myself, I think a lot about stuff, right? Like, I try to think about before I buy anything, like, is buying this thing really in integrity with my own personal values? I have a very strong value on expanding my horizons, I should say, which for me is about travel. So I want to prioritize travel, for instance, over, getting yet another pair of jeans, which I may not need. So what can you do about it? Getting clear on your core values. Again, I'm going to give you guys an exercise on that you can run through if you like. Be honest with yourself, again, about what it is that you want and where it is that you're at. And so you can go back and go through that whole list of different kinds of stresses. And again, there are other things that you may not see on that list because they're there for you. When I'm typically doing this presentation, I say X, Y, and Z, because for everyone, there are additional stresses. And whether that's a particular thing or something that I didn't come up with, it's important for you. But really being honest with yourself about where you are and where you want to be, so you can make a proactive plan, whether that's about your finances or about any other stress that you have. Be kind to yourself. I spend a lot of time in my practice face-to-face with people trying to give them support around not giving themselves such a hard time. Honestly, giving yourself a hard time and judging yourself and using unkind words towards yourself around your choices really ends up being undermining. So treat yourself the way you would treat your best friend, because that can decrease your stress load profoundly. When you're constantly harassing yourself and talking to yourself in a way that makes you feel badly about your choices, it ends up causing way more stress overall. Utilize your resources. Often, and I see this in particular with health issues, but often people don't reach out to get the help that they need that is out there. So that can be around, building a health team. It can be around support online. It can be around organizations like Savvy Ladies. It can be around asking your friends for help. If you're exhausted, maybe you do a childcare trade with a friend. Maybe you, volunteer somewhere that you can end up working 5 hours a week, and then they'll take your kid another 5 hours a week, or, something of that ilk. I live near a co-op in Portland, because everywhere in Portland is near a co-op, but I have many neighbors that actually spend time there in order to get a discount on their food. So there are sometimes options for you that you haven't thought about that might be helpful. But think about what resources you have. People want to help you. And know you're not alone, right? Everyone is struggling with whatever they're struggling with. Often, especially with social media, it looks like everyone's got it going on, but every single person out there has their struggles. And knowing that if you are honest with people and if you're vulnerable and you reach out, that there are an immense amount of resources out there and people who are there to support you. And do what you can do. I think sometimes we get caught up in too much to do, or too many things to do to take care of ourselves, or too many things that need to get handled. Often we're busy. We have many different responsibilities. There are things on our plate that we feel like we can't take off. So do what you can do, and don't pressure yourself to do more than that. And certainly, back to that, be kind to yourself. Don't judge yourself for not being able to do everything, because none of us can. Maybe I often say to people, if you lived in a yurt in Montana and you had a community and you could just send your kids off and people would cook for each other, it's a whole other ball of wax. But there's only so much that you can do. But identify what you can change and what you do have some control over, so you can actually have some movement and make some impact. Prioritizing what things you're going to do, and you can go back and watch this video again. I'm also going to be offering another version of the same presentation that you can download and watch from the webpage that I'm about to give you. But really taking some time after we're done here to make a list of, maybe pick 3 areas on that list of stresses that you want to address, and then pick just 2 things in each of those areas that you think are going to have the biggest impact. And anything you can easily and reasonably take out of your bucket, take it out of your bucket. Sometimes those things are simple, like, oh, I'm gonna just go to bed at 9 instead of staying on my phone until midnight. Or you are going to, just decide not to eat a box of ding dongs every weekend, or, whatever thing it is that you're doing. Because when you decrease your stress load and take the things out of your bucket, you will overall be able to address every single thing that's causing you stress better. Remember to look at the things you can change, the things you can't change, and being very clear about the things you're choosing not to change. I said before, this was the big take home here. Just doing this alone will have a profound impact on your overall stress level. All right, so that will wrap my talk today. Perfect timing to allow for some questions. If you notice at the bottom of this slide in the purple is a page on my website, and on that page you can, as I said, get a copy of another version of this talk that is just a 15-20 minute video. You can get your core values exercise. There's also a worksheet on dealing with sleep, if that's one of your stressors. And the format for that, you can actually do something, make yourself something similar to that for each of these different areas. And then you'll also have an opportunity there to sign up for my email list, which gets you, recipes, free ebooks that I write, will get you information about my online consulting if that's something you're interested in, and occasionally articles that I write for different publications or blog posts that might be of interest. All right, thank you so much, Maggie and Lisa. I'm available to take questions if anyone has anything.
Thanks, Dr. Samantha. That was really helpful and had a lot of great information. And we did have some questions that came in, so I'll start with the first one here, which is, I've tried meditation before and I just can't seem to get into it. What can I do?
Yes, you and so many other people. So the thing that I will say about that is meditation isn't necessarily about being completely quiet in your mind. Even people who meditate for 20 years still struggle with what we call monkey mind. So, the point of meditation is to slow down and rest and try to not, be thinking too much. And the people who need it the most tend to be the people who have the hardest time with it. Now, that said, what I usually recommend is you can either do this sitting or walking, but what you're trying to do is to really just slow your brain down from all of the melee for a minute. So what I actually recommend is to pick a word, and that word can be related to something that you want in your life, like quiet or calm or whatever. It can be any word at all. It could be monkey, really. It can be anything. And what you want to do is just repeat that word with an in-breath and an out-breath as you're sitting. And what that'll allow you to do is bring your focus back to something instead of just trying to make your brain shut up, which is almost impossible. And what you will find is that over and over, you will be thinking about something else, and then you just bring yourself back to that word. I actually, if whoever that is pops me an email at contact@drsamantha.com, drsamantha.com, I have a little article that I wrote about this, and I will go ahead and share that as well.
Okay, great. And another question that came in is, does a gluten-free diet help with controlling stress? I have been gluten-free for about 10 years and I hope it's helping me in some way.
Oh wow, that's a great question. So this is an area that I work with a lot. I actually speak on gluten-free diets all over the country. And what I would say is, if gluten is something that your body has a hard time with, that it will help avoiding gluten. Now that said, not everyone has a problem with gluten. So for some people, gluten causes a stress of just digestive issues. For me, I actually stopped eating gluten when I had a shoulder injury and I was trying to decrease my overall inflammatory load. And my shoulder did not get better at all. However, about 3 months well, maybe a little less than that, 2.5 months in, my husband pulled me aside and he said, I need to talk to you. And, as any married person knows, when the husband pulls you aside to say, I need to talk to you, my assumption was that that was not going to be good. And so he sat down with me and was having a hard time kind of getting something out. And what he ended up saying was that I seemed just, and there was this awkward pause, and he said, normal. And I realized that my anxiety and my mood, which I'd been having some issues with for several years due to some situational things that were going on, had gotten profoundly better from going off of gluten. And my energy was better, and I was happier, and I was less anxious. And so for me, gluten impacts my mental state significantly. For other people, it doesn't do that at all. And so that's again one of those really individual things. I will say that we know gluten causes inflammation in your intestine for everyone, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily causing a significant problem for you. So I don't know the answer to whether staying off of gluten is beneficial for you, nor do I know whether that would be the best first choice. So it could be that it's more important for you, whoever the name of whoever asked that question, to eat more protein and have your blood sugar be more stable, rather than completely cutting out gluten and eating a bunch of gluten-free things that are actually impacting your blood sugar. So the answer is it depends. And again, I would need a lot more information to be able to weigh in particularly. I actually have an ebook. If you go to www.drsamantha.com/GF Essentials, I have a free ebook download that you can sign up for, and that talks all about gluten-free diets and the reasons you may or may not want to do it, and different kinds of reasons that people should go off of gluten, and how to test if it's a problem, etc. So you're welcome to go grab that. It's free on my website.
Okay, thanks. And another question is, I have mounting medical bills. As soon as I see the envelope, I get stressed. I typically avoid opening the bill because I get overwhelmed. Can you suggest a strategy to manage this stress?
Yeah, that is a very common problem in our culture, these mounting medical bills. So, I think that there may be some folks at Savvy ladies who have some good ideas about that as well. But a couple things that I would say. First is that not opening them isn't going to help, because the more you know and the more conscious and aware you are of what's going on, the better off you're going to be. So I would say heading that straight on. Often doctors' offices or hospitals will actually negotiate bills with you or negotiate long-term payment plans. I've written off many, many bills for people who were who we thought it was going to get covered and it didn't, and they were under financial distress, or I've arranged long-term payment plans with them because they want to pay their bills. So what I would say is to gather that together, what it looks like, and to actually take whatever kind of proactive step you can. Pretty much anyone will negotiate. They want to get paid rather than not getting paid. And if the truth is that the medical bills are going to be such that you cannot pay them, talking to someone about what your next steps are going to be to deal with that, whether that's something like filing bankruptcy or something like getting another part-time job so you can deal with it. But leaving the envelopes unopened in the end are going to undermine you from the inside out. So I would have make a filing system for them and get very clear about what's there, and talk to the individual people and do what you can do about getting it, facing it head on. I don't know if Lisa has something more to say about that.
Okay, not for that one.
Okay.
But let's move on to another question, which is, for the stressful things I can't change, what can I do to accept I can't change them?
Oh, yeah, that's huge, right? So counseling is something that you can do around that. The stressful things that you can't change. So accepting it is about changing your mindset. So even just asking that question is a big point toward that, right? So you can change, so I certainly don't want to imply that you shouldn't feel your feelings, because it's really important to do that. But doing whatever kind of work you need to do around processing that, and changing how you actually physically respond to it. So there's a kind of counseling called cognitive behavioral therapy, which you can also get books on and watch videos on. And this is a way to learn to change your responses to things when you are reacting kind of in a stressful way, or when you're mounting a stress response for something. So looking at kind of how you can deal with it emotionally, and then coming up with some tools and tactics for that. But also around that, I would say, accepting that it's something you can't change, and really just honoring that. And then looking for other areas you can change will overall help you deal with the thing that you can't change better. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
And I think we're about out of time. So we want to thank you again, Dr. Samantha, for an excellent presentation. Thank you for your offers to the Savvy Ladies community. Thanks to everyone who joined us today and asked questions. We hope that you'll join us again. And thank you again so much for your time today, Dr. Samantha. It was really great.
Yep, that's my pleasure. And if people have additional questions, you can feel free to pop me an email. My email address is actually on that page, the drsamantha.com Savvy Ladies.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Bye bye.